Trust me and stay silent. A broke server rescued. The city's most dangerous woman, WLW love story. The blood on her hands wasn't hers, and that's what terrified me most. She stood in the narrow alley behind the diner where I worked double shifts just to afford my studio apartment with the leaking ceiling. Her designer coat torn at the shoulder, her dark eyes wild with something between fear and fury. The woman every news channel in the city had been calling a ruthless corporate shark. A heartless executive who destroyed companies and ruined lives without blinking was now pressed against the grimy brick wall of my workplace, trembling like a cornered animal. I had 30 seconds to decide whether to call the police or become complicit in whatever had brought Vivian Cross to her knees in my world. My name is Maya Torres, and I had exactly $47 in my bank account that night. I was nobody special, just another face in the endless stream of servers who poured coffee and smiled through exhaustion while nursing dreams of something more. I had moved to the city 3 years ago, with a head full of ambitions and a heart full of hope. But the city had a way of grinding those things down to dust. My art degree hung on my wall like a monument to naivety, while I worked 16-hour days just to survive. I had learned to keep my head down, to not ask questions, to mind my business in a world that rarely minded yours back. But Vivian Cross was impossible to ignore. She stumbled toward me as I was taking out the trash. My last task before the night shift ended at 2 in the morning. Her perfectly styled blonde hair was matted with sweat and dirt, her expensive heels broken, and when she looked at me, I saw something I never expected to see in the eyes of the city's most dangerous woman. I saw desperation. She grabbed my arm with surprising strength and whispered words that would change everything. Trust me and stay silent. Just for tonight, please. Her voice cracked on that last word, and something in my chest cracked with it. I should have walked away. I should have screamed for help or run inside and locked the door. But I had spent my entire life being invisible, being the person people looked through rather than at, and maybe that's why I understood what it meant to need someone, to see you when the world turned its back. I looked into Vivian's eyes and saw my own reflection of desperation. The same fear I felt every month when rent came due, the same panic that gripped me when I calculated how many meals I could skip to make my paycheck stretch. We were from different worlds, but in that moment, we were both just women trying to survive the night. I brought her to my apartment without thinking about the consequences. She barely spoke as we climbed the 4 flights of stairs to my tiny studio. Her breathing labored, her hand gripping mine like I was the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly become quicksand. Inside my cramped space with its peeling wallpaper and secondhand furniture, Vivian Cross collapsed onto my thrift store couch and finally let herself break. She told me everything in fragments, her words tumbling out between tears she tried desperately to hold back. She had discovered something at her company, something that implicated powerful people in crimes that would shake the city's foundation. She had tried to do the right thing, tried to blow the whistle, and they had turned on her with a viciousness that left her with nowhere to run. The woman the media portrayed as cold and calculating was nothing like the person shaking in my apartment. Vivian talked about her childhood in foster care, about clawing her way up from nothing, about building armor so thick around her heart that she forgot what it felt like to trust anyone. She had become exactly what she needed to be to survive in a world that tried to crush her. And now that same world wanted her silenced permanently. The blood on her hands belonged to a man who had attacked her in a parking garage, who had been sent to make sure her secrets died with her. She had fought back, escaped, and ended up in my alley purely by chance. I cleaned her wounds with the meager first aid supplies I kept under my sink, my hand steady despite the fear coursing through my veins. As I gently wiped blood from her knuckles, she caught my hand and held it, her eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made my heart forget how to beat properly. She asked me why I was helping her, what I possibly had to gain from harboring the city's most wanted woman. I told her the truth, something I rarely admitted even to myself. I was tired of being invisible. I was tired of watching the world happen to other people while I served coffee and collected tips that barely kept me afloat. For once in my life, I wanted to matter. The next few days blurred together in a haze of fear and adrenaline. I went to work while Vivian hid in my apartment, acting normal while my heart raced every time I saw a police car or heard a siren. I brought her food I couldn't afford, shared my space with someone who existed in a tax bracket I couldn't even imagine, And slowly, in the quiet hours between my shifts, we built something neither of us expected. She helped me understand that her coldness had been survival, not cruelty. I helped her remember that vulnerability wasn't weakness. We talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories. In the darkness of my studio while the city lights flickered through my cracked window, Vivian saw my artwork stacked against the wall. The canvases I painted in the few hours I had between shifts. The dreams I had tucked away because the world told me they weren't practical. She studied each piece with an attention I had never experienced, her fingers tracing the brushstrokes, like she was reading my soul through the paint. She told me I was wasting my talent serving coffee, and I laughed bitterly because she didn't understand that talent didn't pay rent. But she insisted there were galleries that would show my work, people who would appreciate what I created. She promised that if we survived this, she would help me. I wanted to believe her, but I had learned long ago that promises were just pretty words that rarely meant anything. The turning point came on the 5th night. Vivian's contacts had finally come through. Journalists willing to publish her evidence. Law enforcement not on the payroll of the people hunting her. She had what she needed to bring down the empire built on lies and corruption. But going public meant painting a permanent target on her back. Meant accepting that her life would never be safe or simple again. She stood at my window, looking out at the city that had made her and broken her. And I stood beside her, our shoulders touching in the small space. She turned to me and said something that made my world tilt on its axis. She didn't want to do this alone anymore. She was tired of armor and walls. She wanted someone to see her, really see her, and I already did. We kissed in that moment, and it tasted like hope and desperation and new beginnings. It was messy and imperfect and absolutely everything I didn't know I needed. Vivian Cross, the woman who supposedly had no heart, held me like I was precious, like I was the answer to questions she had been too afraid to ask. I had spent my whole life feeling small, but in her arms I felt infinite. We were still terrified, still surrounded by danger, still facing an uncertain future, but we weren't alone anymore. The story broke the next morning. Headlines screaming across every screen in the city. Vivian's evidence brought down politicians, executives, and criminals who had thought themselves untouchable. The woman they had tried to silence became the voice that echoed through every corner of the city. The narrative shifted from dangerous criminal to courageous whistleblower overnight. My role in her survival remained a secret she protected fiercely. But between us, we knew the truth. She had needed someone to trust, and I had needed to be someone worth trusting. The aftermath wasn't a fairy tale. Vivian faced investigations and threats and a complete dismantling of the life she had built. I continued working at the diner because revolutions didn't pay bills. But something fundamental had shifted. Vivian kept her promise. She introduced my work to galleries, to people who saw what I had been trying to express through paint and canvas. My first exhibition opened 3 months later in a small gallery downtown, modest but mine, and Vivian stood beside me as people actually looked at my art, really looked at it and saw value. We built our relationship in the spaces between chaos, learning each other in quiet moments stolen from a world that demanded too much from both of us. Vivian was discovering who she could be when she didn't have to be ruthless to survive. I was discovering that I could take up space, could matter, could create something beautiful even when the world seemed determined to grind me down. We were both becoming softer versions of ourselves, not weaker but more human, more real, more willing to be vulnerable with each other. Money was still tight for me even as Vivian rebuilt her career with a new focus on ethical business consulting. She never tried to simply give me money, understanding somehow that I needed to earn my own way, that my independence was part of who I was. Instead, she opened doors, made introductions, believed in me when I struggled to believe in myself. She showed up at the diner sometimes, sitting in my section and leaving tips that made my coworkers jealous, her eyes following me with a warmth that made my cheeks flush. The most dangerous woman in the city had become my safest place to fall. A year after that night in the alley, I sold my first major piece to a collector who paid more than I had made in 6 months at the diner. I gave notice the next day, my hands shaking as I handed in my apron, stepping into a future I had only dared to dream about. Vivian met me after my last shift, and we walked through the city streets together, hand in hand, 2 women who had saved each other in the ways that mattered most. She had needed someone to trust when the world turned against her. I had needed someone to see me when I felt invisible. We had given each other exactly what we needed. If this story touched your heart, if you believe in the power of trust and taking a chance on someone when they need it most, please don't scroll past without letting me know. Hit that like button, share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe because I share stories like this about love, courage, and the unexpected ways people can change each other's lives. Your engagement helps me keep telling these stories that celebrate love in all its forms, especially the love that finds us when we least expect it but need it most. Our story didn't end with that perfect moment of walking into the sunset together. Real life is messier than that. Vivian still had nightmares about the men who had hunted her. I still had moments of doubt when the artist life felt too uncertain, too precarious. We argued about silly things and serious things, learned each other's edges and soft spots, discovered that loving someone meant choosing them even when it was hard. But we kept choosing each other day after day, building something real in a world that had tried to break us both. Before I end this story, I want to ask you something. Have you ever taken a chance on someone? Or has someone taken a chance on you when you desperately needed it? Drop a comment below and share your story, because I believe these moments of connection and trust are what make us human, what make life worth living even when it's hard. Now, 2 years later, I have my own small gallery, and Vivian has built a consulting firm that actually helps companies do better rather than just do more. We share an apartment with actual heating and windows that don't leak, filled with my art and her books and the life we're building together. Sometimes I still can't believe that the broke server and the city's most dangerous woman found each other in a grimy alley and created something beautiful. But I look at her across our breakfast table, coffee in hand and morning light in her hair, and I know that trust and silence gave us both a voice we didn't know we had. The woman who asked me to trust her and stay silent became the person I can tell everything to, and the silence we shared. That first night transformed into a conversation that never ends, a love story that began with blood and fear, and became something neither of us knew we were capable of creating. She saved me from invisibility, and I saved her from loneliness, and together we saved each other from lives half-lived in the shadows. That's the thing about trust, it's always a risk. But sometimes the risk is the only path to becoming who you were always meant to be.